we're over halfway through. That good. Okay. There we go. There we go. Well, we're really, really excited. I don't know if you saw the news today. Our registration numbers just crested 17,500. Almost 18,000 people are registered to attend. The fact that all we're running around the city, not only the biggest free entrepreneurial event in the world, it's now officially half the size of South by Southwest Interactive, and it's 100% free. So super, super, super excited that you're all here. So the panel today, really excited to have this awesome group of entrepreneurs. I'm Eric Matisik. I serve the Governor as the Chief Innovation Officer, but also a founder myself, running an early stage company in the insurance tech space called Imagine Analytics. And with me, I have three amazing founders and one of our best investors in the state, the founder of the Colorado Impact Fund, Jim Kelly. And I'm going to let each of the entrepreneurs go down and do two things. One, tell you a little bit about themselves and their capital story. And for today's context, this is really about talking about how to raise capital outside of Colorado and the perspective of these entrepreneurs that have done that. And I think Jim has both of you as a private equity investor, an early stage investor, one who's formed funds, and also is an entrepreneur whisperer in our community. And so this should be a really fun discussion. And so I'll let Lee kick it off.
Sure. Hi. I'm Lee Mayer. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of a company called Havenly. If you've done a couple of days at Startup Week, you've probably seen me. I've been incredibly overexposed this week. Luckily, I'm leaving town tonight, so this is the last time you'll see me speak this week anyway. Unless you happen to be going to the Better Homes and Garden Conference tomorrow. So I am the CEO of a company called Havenly. Havenly is the easiest way to decorate your home. We match you up with an interior designer who helps you design your home, all for one low flat fee. So our capital story is we're sort of in between our Series A and Series B round of funding. We are $13.8 million in, which was raised in effectively 2 rounds, a seed round of $1.5 million and a Series A round of 12.3 total.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Hester, the co-founder and CEO of Fair Harbor. Fair Harbor is the largest reservation platform for tour and activity companies. We think about travel as lodging, airline, and experiences. We power the experiences. We're currently 180 people, and our capital story is a little bit different than the groups here. We're actually have only taken a friends and family round, and we've grown from 5 people and $33,000 in revenue in our first year in 2013 to this year we'll do $50 million and have 180 people.
Bootstrapped.
Can we invest? So I'm Jim Kelly with the Colorado Impact Fund, and one of my colleagues, Grace Oliva, is here as well. So we, as the name suggests, and some of you probably know us, we founded this fund a little more than 3 years ago now for the specific purpose of investing in Colorado-only companies. So we invest solely in companies that are based in Colorado. Obviously, they often or always have operations outside of Colorado as well. But what we were trying to do was tap into the investor interest here in the state, and there was a lot of it. The fund is $63 million, but to tell you the truth, when we went out to raise the fund, our initial target was $25 million. All of our money, by the way, it's private money. There's no state or other public money in it. But we initially set out to raise $25 million from Colorado investors, and pretty quickly some of the investors said that isn't enough. So we raised the target to $50 million, and in 8 weeks we had $63 million. So what I think that reflects, hopefully of relevance to some of you, is the investor interest here in the state to support those of you who are starting these businesses here in Colorado.
Hello, good morning. I'm Todd Olson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pendo. We're actually based in Raleigh, North Carolina. But as I've been sharing with a few folks, I'd like to say we have Colorado roots. Prior to founding the company, I was the VP of product at Rally Software, headquartered in Boulder, Colorado, and I spent pretty much 3 weeks a month here in Colorado. So, and the idea was born out of my experience there. So in many ways, you could argue that our roots actually started in this community. What Pendo does is we help people improve their digital experience. So if you've used software and been frustrated with not being able to get value out of it, not being able to use it effectively. We help SaaS companies, really anyone with a digital software experience, both understand how their users are using it and feed that data back to actually improve the quality of the overall experience. If software is eating the world, we're the ones that are hopefully making it more consumable. Our funding story, we just completed our Series C round. We've raised a little over $56 million to date. That spread out. We did essentially $2 million seed, broken into two tranches, essentially 1 and 1.25, so just a little over 2. We did our Series A, which was a $9 million round in 2015, led by Battery Ventures out of Boston near Jaguar. Then we did our Series B just in December of last year, led by Spark Capital out of the Bay Area, Megan Quinn, and then was approached actually unexpectedly by Meritech. Meritech actually invested in Rally, so they did the pre-IPO round for that, and I just kept the relationship for all those years with the partner, and he asked me if he'd be willing to take money even though we weren't raising, and well, the answer was yes, and we just closed our Series C, which was a $25 million round led by Rob Ward at Meritech in July of this year.
That's awesome. So we have a really good platform for a discussion. In the middle, we have an entrepreneur in a company that's headquartered in Hawaii, but more importantly has been bootstrapped from the beginning. And of course, Havenly taking capital both from Colorado and from San Francisco. And I think it's fun to hear Pindo's story, especially with the Rally connection. I'd like to start with Lee and really talk about, as you started to grow your business and especially raising capital locally, what are your tips and tricks as it relates to how you position yourself with San Francisco and try to raise capital here successfully as well?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two very different stories, and you have to be prepared for that. Everywhere you go, well, everything you do is really influenced by the ecosystem that you're pitching in. So New York, San Francisco, or the East Coast, San Francisco and Bay Area and Colorado are actually very different profiles. I pitched on all of them. And so my seed round actually was pretty New York heavy. We did have a number of Colorado investors, but if you look at the dollars raised, it was really New York heavy. And I think from my perspective, and again, I come from a consumer perspective. Consumer investors are fairly different from some of the investors some of these guys will have. But on the East Coast, you get a lot of like really metrics-driven people. Like they're looking for how much revenue have you raised, what's your user base, what sort of even your early unit economics, what's your sort of cohort math. And that was sort of interesting and very diametrically different from California investors, who were way more interested in my vision, how big it can be, what the comparables are, what the comparisons are. In San Francisco, it was a lot more like, oh, you're like Stitch Fix. We love Stitch Fix. We didn't get to invest in Stitch Fix. So yeah, maybe we'll invest in you. In New York, it was like, oh, that's great. You've grown from X to Y. Colorado was our toughest market. We're based here. I actually had very few connections here before I started this company, so I'm fairly new to the ecosystem prior to this company. And it was a tough market for us. Investors here, at least at the time, so I raised my seed round of capital in 2015, but I started raising at the end of 2014, and it was like really difficult. People looked at me and they're like, oh, aren't you adorable? An interior design business. Yeah, you should talk to someone who gets it, because I don't really get it. So we got a lot of that. I didn't look like any other entrepreneur around here. My joke is like, everyone here that gets funded is like, awesome, but also typically like a dude that wears a hoodie, and I never wear hoodies, like ever. I wonder if I would have gotten funded quicker. I don't know.
A pinstripe hoodie.
Yeah, but potentially. So I don't know what it was. Maybe I just wasn't very good at it. I have no idea. But in Colorado, I actually had a really tough time. It took me a long time. And the interesting thing about raising capital here, again, in the consumer space, is at the seed stages in particular, coastal firms don't want to invest in you. They don't. Sometimes you'll get lucky and they will, particularly in enterprise, sometimes they will, you'll see it. But on the coastal side of the world, no real institutional capital has come in on the consumer side. in the seed round. Our Series A was a lot easier. Every round gets a little bit more sort of metrics based. It's a little bit less of a guessing game. So we actually were lucky enough to get multiple term sheets, both from the Bay Area and here with Foundry Group, which is in Boulder. We took the Foundry Group offer. They were the only people that didn't ask why we were here. And then actually we closed in 2 tranches. So we had a similar situation where we had an investor that had given us a term sheet that we'd turned down, who came to me 2 months later and was like, hey, would you like to take a little bit more capital into your Series A round? I said, definitely not at that price. But if you give me more, I will take the capital because I like having millions of dollars in the bank, just typically sort of a good thing. So, so that was kind of our general story. But again, like the way we pitch is super different. The story we told to Foundry, and I think what they sort of grabbed onto, was very different from our Bay Area investors, whether it's 500 Startups or Binary, and what they invested in.
Todd, your investment story, obviously, being in Raleigh and then raising capital in Silicon Valley. What were some of the tricks as you know, how to leverage San Francisco, your relationships in New York, but really keep it kind of homegrown in Raleigh?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I feel like an ass wearing a hoodie now, so just putting it out there.
It's an amazing hoodie. I love the logo.
Apparently, I look like everyone else raising money. So, and how ironic. But but in Raleigh, we knew all the players. It's a very small community. Probably smaller than this community, to be candid. And I mean, it was tough. I mean, I had a proven track record. My co-founders had proven track records. Even then, taking money away from them felt like one of the hardest endeavors. It's harder than any round we've raised was that first $1 million by a large degree. And I mean, granted, we just had an idea and we had a vision and we had pain and we had some validation, but you're raising on yourself as a person, to be honest. And the fact that my person wasn't getting the money was humbling for a period of time. Now, I was fortunate to have a good relationship with one of my prior seed investors in Washington, D.C. Eventually, he just said, look, I'll lead the round out of Washington. And then we put together the rest of the pieces mostly in New York. Now, I will say one of the things I did very early on was spend a lot of time in the Bay Area, even during our seed round. I probably met with 15 to 20 VCs, mostly to hone my pitch. I knew they wouldn't get on a plane to come visit me, but the average VC in Silicon Valley sees hundreds of companies per week. We're in Raleigh or DC, they may see tens of companies per week. So if I'm going to raise money from people that only see a few, I'm going to go, break my pitch down, and because within a week, I knew every competitor I'd get matched against, and I could spend all my time doing due diligence on them, understanding how we position. So I think it was really good for just being smart about the market, knowing that they would simply never get on a plane for, $1 million, seed round. So it's just not going to happen.
So the tip there is go to Silicon Valley to hone the pitch and come home and grab some money.
I think for that stage, now we basically have to get our money from Silicon Valley because that's where most of the really large funds are. So it's like a totally different game we're playing. But in that first round, using them to bounce every idea off was awesome. So I learned so much in a very short amount of time.
Jim, with over 75% of the capital in early stage companies kind of being invested in California, New York, Massachusetts, as a lifelong investor, what are you seeing come into your office, and what are some of those attributes that are either uniquely Colorado or kind of the tips for some of those early stage investments that you make?
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing we did by design that has turned out, I think, to be a good thing, both for the ecosystem, if you will, as well as for our investors, is we've decided, different than most funds, we're multi-category. So we've invested in healthcare, we've invested in consumer, we've invested in tech. And so the learning curve for us sometimes can be a little bit longer, and as a consequence, somebody like Todd may come in and pitch, and because we're not investing within 20 degrees of what he's doing, sometimes it may take us a little longer to figure it out. But the benefit of that for the system here in Colorado, which is one of the things we're really trying to prove out, is that you don't have to fit in a particular industry category. We'll look at anything. I think in terms of tips, a lot of this stuff is, part of it's just human nature. How do you come across? Do you come across as a good person? not trying to quote unquote sell us something. And again, that's human nature. Nobody likes to be sold something, but I feel badly sometimes for really talented entrepreneurs that come in and they're so transparently trying to sell you something that you want to just say, relax, let's just have a conversation about your business. And so I find the people that are most effective, look, at the end of the day, you have to be an advocate for your idea, right? Because otherwise I'm not going to be if you're not passionate about it. But to have an authentically balanced view of the risk and opportunities and to come across that way is so much more effective than the people that are really just trying to sell us something, because when somebody's trying to sell you something, then you got to kind of calibrate, okay, well, how much of this is right and how much, is kind of funny business or whatever. But anyway, I think that's obvious, but the personal connection you make in these situations, and I know we're also very cognizant of the fact that it's stressful for people. It's really hard, and in many cases, people have had, I hate to say this, we've had people break down in tears in the office, and we, walk around the conference table and start giving them a hug, which isn't exactly from the textbook of what a venture fund's supposed to do. But the point is, it's really stressful, and just so you know, we really get that. We really understand that. If you don't have a good idea, we're not going to be able to fund you, but we appreciate how difficult it is to make these pitches.
Thanks, Jim. So Lawrence, your tip coming into this is don't raise money outside of Silicon Valley, or don't raise money at all. As you've been approached, how have you been thinking about capital, especially at this point where you have hundreds of employees and you become kind of a global business? How are you thinking about it today?
So I'd say a couple things. We ended up in Denver because I had a sibling that lived here and was our first customer service hire, and ended up building our support and account management around him. We weren't thinking about fundraising when we moved to Denver, but our experience is that I think if you grow a good business, it doesn't matter if you're located in Denver. Silicon Valley is right around the corner. We've gotten all the calls we would need. For us, it's always been about control and competition and winning. And we've been fortunate enough to be in an industry in which two competitors, one that raised $33 million and another raised $60 million, have gone extinct in the last year. And we really just have such a whole shot to win. For us, there's really been no pressure to raise money in the short term. I think every once in a while I have the reoccurrence of what I call the night sweat, where I wake up just in a pool of my own sweat thinking, oh my God, the shit could hit the fan tomorrow. Maybe we should go get some fucking padding already. But we just never have taken that leap. I think a large part of our success has been we really can just do whatever we want, which is a little bit scary as we have a lot more mouths to feed. I think at some point in the next year we'll probably say, maybe it's time to take that leap, take additional funding, and really go out and win the market.
Taking the bootstrap path, you always hear the craziest stories about, whether you're eating macaroni and cheese for 6 months or sleeping on your friend's couch. And what were the embryonic stages of the business? How did you outrun capital, and how did you start generating enough revenue to get out of that, kind of Bermuda's Triangle?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually did sleep on a couch. I started the business in Hawaii with another sibling of mine, and I slept on his girlfriend's couch for 6 months. The following year, we hired an employee. We promised them housing in Hawaii. We actually didn't have enough money to provide them housing, so I moved back to the fucking couch again for 9 months at 31, no less. And I started my first job at a college. I worked on Wall Street, so I wasn't really accustomed to sleeping on a couch. For us, we've actually been revenue producing from day one. The way we make money is we charge people that book on our clients' websites a booking fee, and that meant from day one, we actually launched less than a marginally viable product. My brother and I were all the automation we promised our first account as the developers tried to keep up with our bullshit. And we've always had money coming in the door. The scary thing has been, while we haven't raised money, we've started generating revenue, and we've gotten over our skis a couple times. A couple years ago, we didn't think seasonality was a thing, and we hired way too many people, and that was, I think, the most white-knuckle 3 months of my entire life. thinking, oh my God, we might not make it, but if we make it to January, we're good forever. It's been a crazy ride.
That's awesome. We've talked a lot about the successes, the story, how you got there. From a challenges perspective, you talked a little bit about Todd when you're in San Francisco, getting coached up to come back and win. I would love you and Lee's perspective on a few of those meetings or those challenges where you just thought, there's no way this is going to happen. I'm stuck. We're not going to raise capital. Like where were those hills where you doubted yourself as a business, and how'd you overcome it?
A lot of those were earlier, and I'll never forget. I was meeting with Excel. I won't give the partner's name, but he's on the Midas list, and amazed to get this meeting. And we're sitting there, and you can just tell he's tuned out. And you spend a lot of time getting a meeting with Excel, or one of the top venture firms in the world. And I swore mid-meeting, a woman walks in, just interrupts us, hands me a little piece of paper. And 10 minutes later, the meeting ends. And I swear, he must have texted her, please find a way to get me out of this meeting. It was kind of what it felt like. And I got out of the meeting. I was just so angry that the pitch was wrong, everything was wrong. That I spent the next 2.5 hours in a Starbucks redoing my entire presentation because I had a meeting with Andreessen Horowitz 3 hours later. So to get those kind of at-bats, and you just want to take advantage of them, and that was a particularly stressful time early in the company's history, and ultimately we didn't take money from either of them, but it is what it is. Another one was right before we took that second tranche in our seed round. We thought we could raise an A, but we were way too early. We had revenue we have some paying customers. That means we could probably raise an A round, and no, we couldn't. And I remember December 26th, the day after Christmas, agreeing to meet someone in Manhattan. So, it was a grueling travel day on the day after Christmas. Went there, spent hours. I was coming down with some sort of severe sinus infection, so I could hardly stay vertical for the meeting. And sure enough, didn't work out. Days later, and thinking, what would I do next? And we ended up going back to existing seed investors and taking a little more money inside, which felt like a failure at the time, but honestly, it was that failure that got us to the next stage, and the rest is, I wouldn't say history, but it's been a kind of a downhill fundraising cycle since then. So, I think some of those times are bleak. It's painful and lonely when you're out there and getting a lot of no's.
I think one of the things that I say a lot is fundraising has made me realize I've lived a very fortunate life in the past, because nowhere else in my history have I gotten 142 consecutive no's ever. I think if I had, I would have been a very sad human. But I did. I had 142 consecutive no's. You get so bitter at the point where you just start counting, and you save the emails, and you remember them. And by the way, that happened, the exact same thing happened to me at Excel, and I want to know who the partner is, because I felt the same way. It was wait a second, you're clearly not engaged, and then someone came in and you had an emergency, really?
That were a mistake. Candidly, we should not have passed on them. Hopefully everything we've done, we've made 8 investments, we're about to make our 9th and 10th. I think each of them really passed on some things, and so nobody gets it right all the time. But you gotta have enough at bats to raise your capital.
Have you ever thought about moving to San Francisco or moving to New York, or has that ever crossed your mind, or are you really content in Raleigh and Denver and Hope?
Yeah, one of my most contentious board meetings, and I'm kind of open to talking about this. One of my most contentious board meetings, and it was a really tough board meeting for me personally, was effectively 2 of my board members debating where the company should live. And frankly, the conversation was, I have a board member that was a classic Silicon Valley guy, and he just didn't believe that you could build big companies here. His point was there haven't been big consumer companies built in Colorado, and he's from where we were. I think ultimately an easy one. You're that early and someone's telling you there's no way you're going to be able to find the talent to scale, and you're starting to feel that friction already. We're only 50 people. Not filling and marketing roles is actually and someone who sees and manages a ton of big companies is saying you're not going to be able to do it here. it's kind of tough to stand up to that. Luckily for us, again, we had Foundry as an investor. Jason Mendelson sits on my board, and I think is very good about saying, like, that's absurd. And I don't know. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I do think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's harder to build a company here. I think in some ways. I think it's easier. And the leadership you have to make that call. But yeah, I mean, like a year and a half ago, there was a 80% chance, I suppose, that I was going to move to San Francisco. I didn't. I'm still here, clearly.
Our engineering is based in San Francisco, and they have been from day one. So from a hiring standpoint in the engineering front, I feel like we're already there. But I love the unit economics of Denver and the fact that you can pay people a support salary to live in Denver, and they can still afford the Epic Pass. You just can't get that in San Francisco, and that's the reality. From a fundraising standpoint, I've spoken with plenty of people. They all say, I'm coming to Denver more often. I really feel like Denver going out and getting that big round, if you have the right connection. Lucky. We've been lucky from day one. All my friends still working on Wall Street or at VC funds. So I've never really felt like Denver's that constraint or that issue, but you have to build a big business, and I think that if we'd been looking for fundraising in our earlier stages, it really would have been a challenge to go get that small round. Those are the hard ones to find. Once you've broken through that barrier and have built a scalable business, then the inbounds will come, and it doesn't really matter as much where you are.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Back in those early days when I had a few of those early no's, I had one Bay Area investor that basically said, if you moved, I would do this deal. And I kind of explained to him my personal situation with kids and what have you. And it just became clear to him that I was definitely not moving. And then there were constraints that were keeping me there. And he just basically passed. I mean, that was it. It was done. And that was hard. I mean, I struggled with that. I went home. I was like, well, maybe I could figure out a way to. And then, I mean, that lasted like maybe an hour. And maybe whiskey and other things helped me forget about it. But now we talk about it quite a bit because now it's about scaling, growing a great company, and recruiting executive talent is the one thing that we think can be a challenge in an area that I would say doesn't have critical mass. The challenge is, I was interviewing someone that was in Boston, and I flew them and their entire family down to Raleigh. But the question is, what if it doesn't work out? I mean, jobs don't work out. Are there 3 other companies like you in the neighborhood? Well, no, there aren't. So now thinking I'm having to move back, and you've got kids and you're pulling them out of school. So that's a hard decision. And now the good news is when you get to a certain scale, you're going to be forced, as any company, to become distributed. There are just very few large companies that aren't distributed. So you got to build that muscle eventually. And we've just now, we bit the bullet and now have a team in the Bay Area. We have a team in New York, and then we have an office in Tel Aviv via acquisition. So we're being forced to build that muscle. But I think I'm not going anywhere, and now I feel good about the decision. So.
That's awesome. Well, for all of you in the audience, I would love you to start to think about your questions. We're going to switch to Q&A here in just a second. I'm going to ask Jim one more question, and it's a similar question that we asked Brad Feld yesterday. Jim, with your view, both being a private equity investor and now a venture investor, what are those 2 or 3 traits that you see in an entrepreneur that you just, when you walk out of the room, you're like, that's check ready. Like, I know that this is a great deal. And they could be personality traits. They might be about the fundamentals. But what's kind of your 2 or 3 guiding principles around your investments?
Well, it's a little bit I mentioned earlier, that authenticity and integrity. I mean, that's hard to sort out in a short meeting, but all of us in life have had bad experiences with people that, are a little low on the integrity quotient. So it goes without saying, trying to figure that out in a meeting. We're pretty aggressive. I mean, maybe where my private equity background of 30 years has been helpful. We're pretty aggressive about using our network to check people out pretty quickly. And it's funny, sometimes I'll see other entrepreneurs or other funders not even bother to call us about an entrepreneur that we know really, really well. And it's just kind of wacky to me that people don't do kind of basic 101 kind of research, but it's so valuable whether you're building your team and you should do the same thing about your funders, by the way. If a fund won't allow you to talk to the CEO of 6 or 8 companies you identify on their list of investments, that's not a good sign, because you need to do that basic research about how people really are. So obviously the integrity, and then it just gets down to competence. Does this person really understand, and is this their best idea? Where funders like we can get tripped up, particularly in the venture area, is you may be an incredibly talented entrepreneur. This just may not be your best idea. And the next idea, or your last one, was your best idea. So part of our, whatever skill there is involved with what we do, is trying to figure out, okay, Lee is fantastic. Is this her best idea, or is the next one going to be the best idea? And you just have to be direct and honest about that.
There's no next one for me.
And I think you already have your best idea, but
The best one.
anyway, you know what I mean.
All right, questions from the audience. Right here in front.
Yeah, so this is for Lee and Todd, since both of you have had a lot of no's, and then also from Jim on the other side of it. Investors will always say, "Hey, put us on your monthly update list." We'd love to hear how things are going and the traction of how you're working on in the business. Did your overall investment come from anyone who had basically said, not necessarily no, but they said no, but keep us updated if something good happens? Or was it someone brand new that you talked to after you refined your pitch and really nailed it the first time talking to them? And then spin that for you. Have you ever invested in someone 2 months after you initially said no?
I have a really strong opinion on it, and people are going to disagree. So I'm just going to start with it, and then you guys can pile on. Don't do it. Just don't do it. I think this is where I get sort of fundamentally annoyed at investors, all investors. And I am one right now, and I'm annoyed at myself because I do this too. The thing about being an investor is it is all too fucking easy to sit on the sideline and just wait. I'm just gonna sit here. I have an infinite option on investing in your round. So I'm just gonna sit here and look, and maybe when I'm bored and I'm waiting for my Starbucks coffee, I'll peruse your email. But my whole thing about investments is, and I'm sorry, it's so fucking true. No one that was on my update email invested in me. You know why? Because they got too much access. It was too easy to sort of sit on the sidelines. And then ultimately, when the momentum kicked in and we got sort of oversubscribed on a couple of rounds, then they wanted in. But by that time, I was like, no, dude, you've been sitting on 15 months of my updates. Where the hell were you when I needed you? And I think that was something that again, a lot of people disagree. I'm so fun. And there are two things around this. One is just, I'm annoyed about it. And the second is, I actually do think there's some interesting dynamics in the investment world, particularly in the early stages. It's more about you as a person. It's also a lot about external social proof. So a lot of investors that you meet with will say, yeah, I'm interested. Tell me when you find a lead investor, which is their way of saying, I have a fucking option on you. And if you get cool enough, if the coolest guy in school asks you out to the dance, then I'll want to ask you out. And ultimately, what ends up happening is, I think when you give someone that much access, I think something happens where it's a little too easy. And again, it's one of those really subtle things. And this is, again, I think very true in the early stages. As you get later, it's harder. You can't game the system in any way. But there's something psychological about, it's kind of like dating. If you're giving away the milk for free, as my mom would say, who's going to buy the cow? And so, I don't know. Again, my personal opinion, I know a lot of people disagree. But
Let's get Todd's personal opinion after that.
Wow, Lee's tough. Wow, jeez. I won't ask it on her list. I don't do formal lists either, though. I mean, not out of some policy thing, but I will say I approached fundraising in my B and even my A maybe a little bit differently, in that I didn't, for once I got to a point where I was always raising money when I didn't need money, and spending more time raising money when I didn't need money, because then I wasn't actually asking for money, so I wasn't giving the opportunity to tell me no. I was sharing updates, though, every single month or every single quarter regularly with a handful, about 15 people. And so what that did is it gave them information. Now, I gave them nothing on paper, nothing emailed to them, no PDF. I don't ever share numbers with anyone. I share broad numbers, high-level numbers, percentage differences, companies that we're working with. Sometimes they were customers, sometimes they were prospects. More of a conversation. I'm inviting them to coffee. So again, I'm not getting the no, so I'm not giving an opportunity. So I'm basically avoiding the opportunity to be rejected, which is a good thing. It makes helps your ego. But by doing that, you are building a relationship, because what you're doing is you're saying, this is what I think I'm going to be in a quarter, and then when you're checking in, if you're at that point or beyond that point, that one shows your level of forecasting, your thought. You also can share what you've learned in the past quarter, so it shares kind of how you're approaching the problem. So it is a relationship. I mean, in many ways, there's a discussion and that when you bring on an investor, it's like marriage with massive financial consequences. Not to say that marriage doesn't, it does as well, but it has even more financial consequences, and because it affects other people's lives, and it's more complicated, right? So it's prudent to get to know the human, not just the fund, and that's a big thing as well. You can take money from a fund, but the person is the one that really, really matters. I mean, a good person is way different, and there are good people at funds and less good people. And when I say good, I mean good for your business. I mean, like don't take money for a consumer business from an enterprise person. That would be really stupid. They will give you bad advice, and obviously vice versa. So getting to the person is, to me, super critical, and they should be working for you. So if I'm giving them data, I'm asking for intros. Hey, I'm looking for a new blah, blah, blah. Do you know people? So if they're not willing to work for me to earn, basically you're giving them stock, so they have to show they're willing to work for it. If they're willing to work for me, then I kind of deprioritize them on my list.
Yeah, I would say, not to completely disagree with Lee, but I think it's a question of degree, because of the 8 investments we've made the last couple of years, and Grace, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 5 of those are relationships we've nurtured over a 2 to 3 year period. And where it may be just a question of degree is that we actually try to be helpful for the ideas we like, but that something isn't quite right yet, or maybe it's too early. We help them. We say, here, you should talk to this person who can help you with this channel strategy, or this person can help you with this or that. So we may be saying the same thing, but if we're not helping you during that period of dating, as Lee said, then yeah, you should probably assume, maybe we're not that interested. But if we're engaged, spending our time, using our relationships to help you, I think it's very wise. And again, the proof is in the pudding in terms of, as I said, literally, I think in some cases we spent 2 years working with these companies before we ever actually funded them.
Final question? One over here.
This one's for Jim. I'm Santiago, winner of last year's Denver Startup Week Pitch Challenge, and we've doubled sales since. Twofold question. What do you need to see in an initial email to take it seriously, maybe share with your colleagues, versus trash it? And what do you see? Do you have time in your life and interest in product-specific companies that have a higher likelihood of success or survival, that may only produce a 5 to 10x return versus 20 to 40x, that defendable by patents? Do you have time in your fund for that and in your life, or are you looking mostly on quickly, exponentially scalable software?
There's a lot in there, but one thing I would say, Santiago, is don't do an email, because it's almost impossible to connect. Find somebody who knows us or whatever, and we know a lot of people, so whether it's us or somebody else, and now you know us, so it'll be easy. But don't do an email. Just make a call. We probably see 20 companies a week, Grace. We're on some level where people. So we're in the business of having meetings to learn more, and that first meeting may be 45 minutes or an hour, but try not to do it by email.
Awesome. Well, let's give our panelists a huge round of applause. Thank you so much. I think they might stick around here for a few minutes if you need any one-on-one questions, and then we are going to swap. We've got an amazing panel here just starting in a few minutes. I see Troy sneaking in. And again, thank you all for making this the largest, the best, and the most awesome startup week yet. Thank you.
This is my 3rd second.